episodes of horror with Donna and Eric. I'm Donna,
And I'm Eric.
and we are discussing The Totem by David Morrell. I don't know
I
how
think
to
it's
say
Morel.
Morrell. The same guy who wrote First Blood, which of course is what Rambo is based off of.
Hmm.
Um, so this was my first time reading it, and this was what, your second?
My second time reading it, but it's been, I want to say 15 to 20 years.
Oh,
So
okay.
I
So
had just barely, I kind of knew the location. So
yeah. Okay. So basically like your first time reading it.
yeah, I'd
So
flushed it.
this has
But I
been
remember liking it. I remember when I read it, I went on a big kick with him. I read First Blood and then I started reading everything in order. And I loved his first four or five books because they were, just like James Rowland. I loved the ones that he did before he started doing his series. And Morale started doing his Assassin series and stuff like that. Now he's also stepped out of that and he does a whole bunch of single books too. But I kind of lost interest when we started to keep when he kept doing it over and over again.
yeah.
But initially, yeah, I really enjoyed. I read The Totem is one of those books that falls into my definition of everything is horror or anything can be
Hmm.
horror,
Yeah.
because it's amazing. And then he even says in that forward, you have the one that's got the forward, right? Where he
Uh,
talks about
Look.
the re-release of the book. I didn't know if you read it or not. At the very beginning. What's funny is as I was reading this book, I started kicking myself thinking we should have read this during the werewolf time period, even though
Yeah.
it's not 100% a werewolf book, it has the heart of a werewolf book.
It really does. And I didn't read the foreword, and I do have the introduction, but I found out that apparently it's different
Yeah, so
than the first.
when he originally put it out, or when he gave it to the editor, or she's like, you need a love interest. This book's too long. There's too many characters. And so he ended up having to kind of rewrite it, put the action right away, and it's got a love interest and all that stuff. But then later, after everything had gone out of print, a company wanted to put it out again, and he mentioned that how he still had the original script because he didn't throw anything away, and they were like, "Well, let's print that," and so they read that and they liked it, and then so that's the only version I've read. But people, that when it first came out in the '70s, they read a slightly different or maybe a completely different story with some of the same characters,
Yeah.
which I think is really cool. And that also shows you, the strength of how, you start writing, how little control you have. And another thing that I like about indie horror is that we have more control of what we put out since we are the
Hmm.
ones doing everything. But yeah, so that's what's funny. What's also funny if you read the introduction at the very beginning, he's talking about how this was his fourth book and he wanted to write a horror novel because he liked reading horror novels. And he had just finished reading Salem's Lot. And he thought it was so cool how Stephen King kind of flipped Dracula on its head. And he's like, or vampires on its head. And so he was like, I want to do that with werewolves. And so he was actually trying to write a werewolf book when he came up with the idea for what Totem is about, which I thought was reassuring to me as I was reading it, thinking, oh, okay, this is a werewolf,
Yeah.
thing. Now he switched it because he said everything he read about werewolves was everything he already knew. And we're talking the '70s, so he's going to the library. He's kind of stuck with whatever reference books he can find. But the cool thing is that he had at its heart, he wanted it to be like a werewolf kind of uh, idea or narrative. And then he had they had started reporting. He came across all these reports about animals, livestock being killed, and then he noticed at the same time in real time where he was, livestock was being killed. And so that's where he came up with that angle, and then he kind of went the direction he goes. So
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't really sure where this book was going to go because you start off with Bodine and he finds that deer and like stuck between the two trees that's all
mhm.
desiccated. And the explanation that Bodine thought up in his mind kind of made sense. The snow was really high and the deer was just hungry and couldn't find food and so just died. And then when the snow melted, and then the steer. Um, so I wasn't sure what exactly was happening, but then I was like, okay, what's going on now when the little boy gets bit by the um,
Raccoon.
raccoon. Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And when Markle, is that Doc Markle, when he's getting ready to autopsy the steer,
Hmm.
he sees something that gives him a heart attack and he dies, but you don't ever find out what. So
Yeah, conveniently the people came behind it and torched the whole thing. So wouldn't that have been amazing to know what the doctor saw? We could have saved 200 pages, 250 pages, got
yeah,
right to the end of it. Yeah, it would be interesting. It probably had to be something man-made that um, that maybe was
yeah,
stuck in the guts of or whatever. So
yeah. So I was thinking like Alien was in
mhm.
it. I'm like, okay, so this is gonna be an alien story, and then I'm like, no, maybe not.
I
Um,
remembered the creatures,
yeah,
so I knew it was that kind of a thing. But I had forgotten a lot of the how they got there, all the because there is a lot of characters. And I
yeah,
guess what we should do is set up the plot idea is it's a small town in Wyoming, cattle country, and livestock's being gutted and left for dead, chewed on kind of stuff. And the sheriff is the sheriff, the medical examiner, heck, even the doctor might have been all transplants from different places, and they're all coming off of bad situations.
yeah.
And then you have the weird hippie storyline where they had a commune there
Hmm.
in the 70s, and this book takes place, I want to say, I figured it's in real time, right? So it was like 8 years later.
Yeah,
So it's in the 70s, but the commune was like the late 60s, 70s, and they have all these hippies show up, and they start trying to you get the vibe they were trying to kidnap people or something or force them into the commune. And so the town just the leaders just waited till it got to a boiling point, and then they attack, send the cops in and run them all out. So you have that storyline going on the whole time, and that doesn't make any sense until you get to the end.
right.
So but he does a masterful job of weaving all of these complicated ideas because you have a ton of characters. You have a newspaper writer that's on the last leg of everything
Yep.
that flies in to
He's
write
an
about,
alcoholic.
yeah, and he's older, he's about to get divorced, he's a failure in just about everything he's doing. And he's there to write a follow-up on the commune that's supposedly gone, that's no longer
Yep.
there. And you've got the sheriff who's there, who I I thought it was weird because as you go through it, he's kind of like he kind of reads like. Did you read or did you watch? Was it Yellowstone? He kind of has the same vibe as the Rip character, the guy that does all the work for the family,
Yeah,
who
no, I
marries the
haven't.
daughter. He's got that vibe. He's just got this in charge, good old boy. I'm the law, and I'm telling you what's going to happen. He has that vibe the whole book. And then at the end, when it gets flipped on its head and he's taken out by the mayor, then he's got all this internal doubt and he feels like a coward and all this. But I'm like, he doesn't act like that at any point until that one point at the end. So that's the only thing I had question with the character
Yeah,
because but it's an interesting story. The whole point of it is that there's some sort of animal or creature that comes into town and starts to infect everything with rabies. But it's
rabies.
not
Yep.
really rabies. It's some sort of offshoot of rabies because everything is accelerated and everybody is within an hour reacting to the or whatever.
Yeah.
Although that doesn't make sense too because the kid didn't start going crazy for almost a day.
Yeah, a day or so. Um, and I can't remember, there was another vet. So Doc Markle is the doc that dies, and then there's another
Is it?
um
Oh, it starts with an Owen. Owen.
Owens. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then there's another vet, Owens. So the gang, I'll say, is Nathan Slaughter, the sheriff,
Mhm.
Dunlap, the
Reporter.
reporter, the medical examiner, and then Owens, the other vet. So the funny thing is I don't even remember if we get the medical examiner's name because throughout the later part of the book, And it must have been mentioned like at the very beginning, like when they first introduced him, but it would always say like Owens, Dunlap, and the medical examiner.
Yeah, I'm looking at the last chapter when he's leaving. He's leaving town. He's so tired of death that
Yeah,
he's gonna go be
an
a
actual
doctor.
physician. Yeah, a
And
physician. Yeah,
as I'm scrolling through here, it just keeps saying the medical examiner or the medical examiner said,
yeah,
and at no point at the end, you're right, do we see his actual name?
yeah. So it's like maybe. So I'm kind of here.
Yeah, I'm flipping through here and I keep seeing the medical examiner as the medical examiner scowled. He had been a
Yeah,
star in his profession once back in Philadelphia.
yep.
And so what's funny is his father is a doctor and he decides he doesn't want to be a doctor because he doesn't want to deal with the failure of what happens with all patients as they die. And so in his
Yep.
mind, that's failure. So he would rather be a medical examiner and he was solving cases and he was getting really, you could snap your fingers, the guy's going to figure it out within an hour kind of thing. Like he was a superstar.
He
But
was
then he
like
started,
House, but for corpses.
yeah, but then he started getting weird about it and he got caught. They don't have him fondling the corpse, but they
But
do
there
have
was,
him. There's
yeah,
a vibe, and it's even written
there's,
that way. Like nothing was said, but everybody knew. And
yeah,
he retired or he hands in his no, I can't even think what it's called. Yeah, he quits. He quits his job and he leaves.
yeah,
No big deal. Goes home, gets a job there because his father had a good reputation there, and it was the son coming home. But yeah, you're right. That is weird. It just keeps saying the medical examiner.
yeah. I'm like,
Even
I'm sure at some point when we're, like I said, when we're first introduced to him, we get his name, but I do not remember it, and it's not mentioned throughout the book. It's always the medical examiner.
yeah, no, that is really weird. That's an odd.
Yeah. So I don't
Yeah,
know what that's all about.
yeah, that is weird. I wonder if it's done. I wonder if we're not supposed to have a connection with him at all,
Yeah,
and that's why they did it. But that doesn't make sense. I mean, you would think they would mix it in.
yeah.
Oh, they even have him when he goes to when he finds a dog that is acting crazy, and he thinks it has rabies,
And he
and
goes to
so and
the
the
owner. Yeah.
yeah, he just goes to his house, um, and then the guy punches him in the face and knocks him unconscious. But then he wakes him up and he says, "Hey, you got to help me. There's something wrong with the dog." And the first sentence is the medical examiner blinked at the shirtless man. And so I'm like, that would have been a perfect time to use his name.
Yeah.
And then later, the medical examiner shrugs to sit up. That is crazy. And I think I probably just, it didn't stand out to me until you've mentioned it. But yeah, now it's crazy. Because you
Yeah.
think that would have been a name we would get.
Yeah. And as a medical examiner of this small town, he's probably an important person because he's the only medical examiner, you know?
Yeah, he probably does it for like four or five
Yeah.
towns in the area, you would think. But yeah, I mean they give the vet, Dr. Owens, they actually give him love way more than they do the medical examiner.
And I think the medical examiner was way more of an important
Oh yeah.
character
Yeah, for sure.
than the vet. Because the
Yeah,
because Owens towards the end he's like, I'm outie, you know?
yeah,
He's like
he's smart.
it's like I'm gone. I'm gonna go get my family and we're out of here.
Okay, so and what's so funny is that you're not only does he write a very good monster, so it's a very good monster story, but it's also a very good small town politics story.
Oh
And you
yes.
have that whole thing where the mayor runs basically everything and has spies everywhere. And every time that the sheriff tries to do anything that is even slightly controversial, the mayor's there to shut it down or tell him to do something different.
Yeah.
And so he's always in the way. And he does it in a way that makes everybody in the town believe that they're the ones that came up with the idea. And so he's just this he's a villain
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing. And he's the character that you hate every time he shows up because every time he shows up, he causes another terrible thing to happen by simply existing.
Yeah. And ignoring the problem. And so I was thinking as I was reading that character. I'm like, is this a common thing like back in that era when people were writing? Because you look at Jaws,
Uh-huh.
there's the mayor, whatever he is, who says, "Oh, we're not going to close the beach," and then you got this guy, "Oh, we're not going to do anything. It's not an epidemic, and we're not going to, and I'm going to hinder Slaughter and his gang there
Uh-huh.
and put them in jail." Um,
Well, the way I would think, yes, because these guys all probably went to school at the same time. They're probably all students in the 60s in college, and they come out to write these novels. And some of them probably came out for other reasons. I think the guy that wrote Jaws is actually a marine biologist, but we'll figure that out next when we do that episode. But they all have during that time period, isn't didn't most people that came out of college, didn't they have some sort of level of distrust for government officials? And
yeah,
we all
yeah,
thought they were corrupt. And I think, and you could see it in cinema at the time. 70s was big on corruption being pointed out in the police and in, government higher ups and all that stuff. So I bet you it is a big theme through everything that we get during that time period. That's incorporating town politics. But I think it was very interesting to see it in this one because you
yeah.
could easily tell we're talking a small town in the middle of nowhere. Of course the mayor's going to run it like a kingdom almost,
Hmm.
where he's putting people in place to take the fall and blame for everything that goes wrong, but also allows him to always be the hero.
Hmm.
So it was nice to see him get it in the end, where he basically falls apart when he realizes that they're facing not only are they facing one creature that might be some sort of monster, but they're facing an army of these creatures. Because
Yeah,
I mean, of course, we never say spoiler alert, but we're going to spoil everything. In the book, the whole point is it's not just one little rabid animal that's coming down to bite somebody. It is the commune itself had gone to hide in the mountains, and they've all become infected with whatever this virus is, which
yeah,
is some sort of offshoot of rabies, and it's turning them into animals. And they're all dressed up like animals. They wear the pelts
yep. And they let
and
their hair is grown, and
the only thing that didn't make sense to me is that they almost all seemed like smaller. I mean, the
yeah,
fact that the kid thought it was a raccoon, I mean, that's a child sized thing. So I guess maybe they're mating and having children, and their children are dressed the same way, and they don't really get into that part of it. At one point, though, it sounded like it was a commune filled with men.
yeah,
Yeah, so that doesn't make sense because these should be full grown men that even if they're ill 10 years later, they're not going to have shrunken down to a size of a dog or a raccoon.
right,
But basically, it's an army of people dressed up like animals that act like animals, that everything is controlled by the tide, the moon and light. They're light sensitive, and they just go around and attack everything and eat them and stuff. So
yeah. I loved the part where it was told from the point of view of the boy, but
yes,
it was when he was infected, so it was he was referred to as it, like it said like it was smelling the air or something like that instead of saying he, because at this point it's a creature. Um, I loved that part to
yeah,
get a
because it
little bit of
really, I was
insight
just saying,
into,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, no, yeah, it gives us the insight into what's going on, but it also allows us later to know, I guess, to dehumanize whatever's coming. Because the whole time they're the monsters and they're coming at Slaughter's still saying, no, these are men. We've
yeah,
got to try our best to not just kill them. We're not going to murder them. But as the reader, we knew that no, they're not even remotely human anymore. They are completely instinct driven, and they're not going to. Oh, even though they were still able to plan, scheme, use, throw rocks, use, blew up trucks and stuff like that. So they weren't just animals, but at the same time, they were very animalistic and everything, which I
yeah,
don't think we would have known or realized if we didn't have the insight of the boy. Otherwise, we were just thinking, okay, it's a bunch of crazy people dressed up in pelts that are still just acting like, you know,
yeah,
humans. So you get a different vibe the whole time, and I think it increases the horror because you have the townsfolk who have no idea what they're dealing with. Some of them want to just end it all and just they'll kill everything on sight. Some of them are trying to help them, but they still don't know how to react to anything. And then when they get bit, they freak out because the fact that the sheriff, gets bit and he blows his arm off to stop
Yeah,
it from, getting
yeah,
any higher.
he kind of loses his mind at the end.
Yeah.
Um, he's like, I've been infected, and he like shoots his arm off, which, hey, that's part of the story, but it seemed like his mental state was like quickly unraveling.
Him and
Um,
the reporter. So at the end
yeah,
of this
well,
thing, we
yeah, the
we lose two of
reporter.
the characters. Yeah, the reporter goes completely insane, which I
Yeah,
thought
and
was
they
kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really kind of sad about that because like you meet Dunlop and for me anyways, as I'm reading, you meet him and you're like, oh, I hate this guy. Like
Yeah.
he's just a loser. He's an alcoholic. He's, just there for a story and he's kind of sketchy and weaselly, right?
Hmm.
But then you get to know him and you're like, hey, this guy's not so bad. And you know what? I started rooting for him, man. I'm like, he's gonna get sober and he's gonna, write this hell of a story and he's gonna get all kinds of accolades. And I wasn't thinking like, his wife would take him back or whatever, but I'm like, he's gonna end up moving to this small town and living there and then no, he just completely loses his mind and ends up like completely catatonic, basically. I think he just like sits and drools.
That's what it sounded like. And what's funny is that it happens when he finally answers the question that he's asked the entire book. Where's the Corvette? That's all
Yeah,
he wants to know. That's how he's going to end his story. And then he finds the Corvette and he finds the original guy who
Quiller,
started the
yeah,
whole thing, nailed to a cross in like a Jesus pose and in a room filled with dead bodies and that come alive, that resurrect, I guess technically. And which I thought was weird that they would put the bodies in there and the virus. So what the virus does is it shuts down their mind, turns them into an animal, and then it kills them. But then as soon as they stop moving, it gives the body enough time to regenerate and they come alive again. And
yeah,
and they made points over and over in the book how some of these creatures must have thought they were immortal because they would just come alive. So at any time anything quote unquote died, they just put it in a room. And if it rose, it left, and if it didn't, it just stayed in there and decomposed. And there was a whole bunch of stuff like that. But what made them think that the guy that started it all wasn't going to rise again? That they would nail him to a cross and hang him up on the wall?
right,
This is the one
yeah.
thing I wondered. So, I mean, maybe it's a period of time. Obviously, he didn't. But it wouldn't that have been an interesting twist if they had nailed him to the cross and he did come alive?
Yeah,
And then that would have probably sent. But then also you get this weird religious overtone with a group of people that were not up there to be religious.
right.
They were the hippie commune. I'm thinking, is it free love and uh, getting away from the government and not letting them tell you what to do? But I never got the vibe of religion. So
Yeah,
to
it was just
find that.
yeah, I didn't think it was a religious thing. It was basically what you said. This really rich guy, Quiller, he wanted to live off the grid. He wanted all these people, and he built this compound, and like they just went up there to live off the land. Um,
Now you do
and
learn that they were something sketchy going on. Like he wasn't buying into it as much as he was pushing it on everyone else. Because you get one of the kids that was a local who went and kind of got dragged into the group because he was warring with his father at the time. Um, he has a whole backstory that tells you that he saw all these terrible things and that they were trying to push him into taking those drugs and all the other things, but it still didn't have a religious vibe and it didn't have a criminal vibe as much as it just had a bunch of psychos.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and then the son. So the whole thing with the compound is the son goes to the compound, and the his father, who's a local, goes up there and ends up killing somebody. And then the son testifies against the father. The father goes to jail. The son leaves town, and then he mysteriously just comes back um,
Well,
towards
his
the
mother
end.
just died
Yeah,
and his mother wanted him to go and claim his birthright.
yeah,
So
that's
there
right.
is a little bit of a reason to be there, but it is coincidental that she dies right when and he's up in the mountains shooting these things every time he sees one. So,
Yeah. So then it ends up with him joining the gang with Slaughter and
mhm.
Owens and the medical examiner. So then you have this kid. Um, And
And we say kid, but we're talking about a guy who's probably 28 now,
yeah, yeah,
who's
yeah,
been living on the road. You got the vibe he was living on the road, but then at the end, he's like, "Oh, I was with my mom in Arizona, so maybe he was a normal guy just living there."
yeah,
But
yeah. And I was a little going back towards the beginning. I thought Bodine was going to play a bigger role, um, because that's
yeah,
like the first person that comes across what's going on.
hmm
But then he ends up disappearing with his family. Um, and then you have those. I was really mad about the dogs up in the mountains with the state police. Was it state police?
yeah.
They went up to search for Bodine and his family, and um, none of the dogs made it. Spoiler alert.
And none of the people either. I mean,
None of the
and
people
they're
either.
not, and they're not just killing to kill. These things are wild animals that seem to be killing to eat too. So it's like they're getting the food and stuff, and acting like a wild animal would to some point. But there is some killing just to, because I think every time they had a cow, there was somebody getting chewed on, right?
Yeah,
They had parts of it that was chewed on. So
yeah,
you know what? I wonder if that's what he saw. One the medical examiner. I wonder if he saw a clear imprint of a human bite.
yeah,
And then he would have been like, "What the f?" That's what. And then he has his heart attack, and then they burn the cow's body. So we never. If they would have had that, then
yeah,
that would have helped them at least get a little farther on, which is perfectly. I thought it was a good way. I think he handled it correctly because he gives us a lot of information in the beginning of all this weird stuff, and then he lets us know that somebody knows what's going on, and then he kills that character totally unrelated to what's going on. It's just the guy had heart problems and he just overstimulated and he dies. And so then everybody else is left in the dark. We know that there's something there, something more underlining. I just thought it was he's a great writer. If you read
yeah,
First Blood or any of his other books, they're all really good. I mean,
yeah,
he does such a good job of interweaving all the different stories he's got going on and the characters, and he knows how to keep you in suspense
yeah,
and set up everything so that even at the end, when you kind of have an idea what's going on, it's still kind of suspenseful as you're trying to figure out how they're going to survive everything.
yeah. I was glad it didn't turn out to be just a rabies story
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's why I was like, oh, is that what this is going to be? It's going to be about rabies?
And in a
Like,
way,
come
it
on.
was kind of like a werewolf story. It's talking about
Yeah,
guys who obviously somebody got bit by something and he gets sick, and then or maybe they ate something they shouldn't have eaten because that always is the thing. You know, when you get somebody that's not a nature person and you stick them in nature, they almost always eat something they're not supposed to.
yeah,
And then they have the virus mutate, and then they start. If it's like it was in the story, the first guy who gets the virus becomes aggressive, becomes unmanageable, and also at the same time is acting like an animal that's cornered and wants to get free. So obviously he's going to be biting everybody and stuff. And so then
yeah,
that's how it spreads through the commune. And then you have them morphing into werewolves in a way. They're animals now, but then they're also controlled. And they become more aggressive when the moon is full. So
yeah,
I think it's a very clever way of doing a werewolf story without doing a werewolf story.
yeah.
And so,
One thing I was disappointed in is the title, The Totem.
mhm.
Um, and then the story that one of the state police that were up in the mountains with the dogs told about the Native American
Yeah,
friend that he had. I thought this was going to be more leaning towards Native American lore.
yeah,
But
because he made it
besides,
sound like it was set, decades.
yeah,
So when he told the
yeah,
story of the people that don't like to go to certain sections of the mountains because there's a bad feeling, there's bad spirits or whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
no,
So
that
that's
was
what
a
I
very
was.
interesting story.
That was a really interesting story, and I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be good." So I was a little disappointed with that aspect of it. Um, And when we look at the covers, which I'll bring them up, some of the covers will lead you to believe that as well.
So here's the question: did the original story that we didn't read lean more into that totem
Mm,
idea and the Native American idea and got us the action quicker? Maybe it fit better with the original story than it does, or the story they printed than the story that he originally wrote. And
yeah,
so now it's confusing but because it's so close, he just keeps the title. I don't know because I've never actually read the original because I didn't know it. I didn't know anything about it until I probably bought this. I think it came out in 95 and I probably bought it in 98 or 2000,
Okay.
something like that. It was when I started reading his stuff. So
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, that'd be an awesome. I
Yeah.
wish this was one that we could easily, and I bet you we didn't really look. So I don't want to say I wish we could have gotten both versions. We probably could have got both versions, but
Yeah.
it does read because what I did is I read the book and then I read the intro again. It does make it sound like it all went out of print, and then they came out with this version, and so I'm
Yeah.
thinking this is the only version you can get at a reasonable cost anymore.
Yeah.
But that looks like
Yes.
a Native American thing right there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so
Now, what's
that,
funny is the author of The Fifth Profession and Covenant of the Flame, those are books that came out way after this one, or maybe right after it, but years later. Those are his like assassin books,
oh,
which
okay.
it's a trilogy. It's an interesting series. It's about kids getting turned into assassins and as they grow up, and then going and doing their stuff. It's been a long time since I've read those too, but like I said, he's a very good writer. It's all the stuff he's done I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
But I
Yes.
get tired of them coming up, just like Rollins. You know, here's my 400th book of this series, and he doesn't ever revisit any of the other stuff because his Rollins standalone stuff is some of my favorite things.
Yeah. Yeah, so
And
this is
I,
a good cover, but like we said, it leads you to believe it's Native American lore.
yeah,
Excuse me. Um,
I thought this
again,
was cool.
this is a very cool cover. Um, it kind of reminds me of Darkness in Legend.
Yeah,
Even though these are deer antlers and Darkness has just those big horns, it kind of just reminds me of that.
but it
Um,
definitely makes you think of this isn't a guy in horns, but this is like some sort of creature.
a
It gives that
Wendigo or
vibe off.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. This is totally Wendigo vibes right here. This is a really cool cover.
yeah. I think it's just it's very simple, but the way they did it makes it just pop right off of there, and it makes you think again, some sort of Native American or some sort of,
Yeah, and they make it seem like it's a singular creature too, because it is waiting. It
yeah.
waits. It grows. So it makes you think that there's a singular creature, beast, spirit, whatever. Um, but it's not
And
really.
before we go, didn't that not frustrate you the most about the kid who wanted to prove that he was a big boy? So he goes to hunt the raccoon he saw at the thing. Then he gets attacked, and then he's terrified to tell anybody because then they'll think he's not a big boy. I was like, dude,
Yeah.
you weren't. I'm just like, it's such perfect kid logic, but it was the most frustrating part of the book to me because I was like, we could have got ahead of this. They could have been 12 hours ahead of it, with
Yeah.
him in the bed and stuff.
Yeah. And how he successfully hid that from his parents or his
Yeah, and he
mom was like,
obviously didn't jump. He
yeah.
didn't turn into the beast as quickly as everybody else did. So that's something else I'm kind of curious about.
Yeah. This is the cover that I have. I don't know if
That's
this
what
is the
I've got.
same cover. Yeah. Yeah. I like this cover. Um,
And in the intro, it does say that he writes how this book made it into the top horror books of the 70s before they came out with this version.
yeah.
So makes you kind of want to go back and find the original and see what the differences are.
Yep.
But even that cover with the knife doesn't, I mean, that, I don't know if that plays as much of a, you got the
Yeah. I
knife
don't,
and the antlers. I don't know how that ties together as well as the other stuff.
yeah.
I think
Um,
this is cool.
yeah. This is a really cool. But again, Wendigo vibes
Yeah,
to me.
for sure.
Um, but this
Which I
was,
guess, do you think maybe that's what he's leaning towards? He went for werewolf, but then he kind of starts doing Wendigo, and maybe that's the tie into the Native American story.
yeah.
And they are creatures of um, unsatisfiable hunger. So, which would be just like a Wendigo.
Wendigo. Yeah.
So maybe what we are reading is a Wendigo thing, and although he kind of shapes it like a werewolf story, he kind of morphs the two characters together, the two kind of
Yeah.
creatures.
Yeah. Because I'm really not up on my Wendigo lore, but I don't think the moon and light play a big part of the
Yeah, in fact,
Wendigo.
I wonder if the light part is really more of a rabies thing
Yeah,
because they did mention how when you have rabies, you're light sensitive. And so they wanted
yeah,
to tie that in to make you think more rabies and then the virus changing. But a virus in a person that turns them into dressing up like an animal and eating people would very much fit into the Wendigo,
yeah.
um, you know, mythology.
And this is another cool one.
Yeah, I thought that was cool too. And it feels like the something they put out in the 70s or maybe, 80,
Yeah,
very, very beginning 80, 81 kind of stuff. It almost has the feel of a slipcover or hardcover,
yeah,
but
yep,
I didn't see none of it was listed as what it was. And I actually don't know if any of these are the original cover. We might be looking at one of the originals and just not know. So
yeah. And this looks like another more recent.
yeah, I was gonna say, and then but the deer throws it off. The antlers are cool, but you didn't need a deer head. Well, and I guess they had it because of the thing in it. But
Yeah,
I hate when it stands out too much.
yeah.
And we don't have the full moon there, do we?
No, it's just like
Yeah,
a crescent moon. So this must be another version of the more recent one because it says with an introduction by the author.
yeah,
So this must be another version of the um
yeah. Well, when they started doing terrible covers, this
yeah,
must be it.
yeah. Yeah, because there really wasn't a lot of mention of deer, except for that in the beginning when there was really a lot of focus on that deer that was stuck between the trees.
And there was mention of the lack of wildlife later by all
Yeah,
of the people that kept going into the woods. But I mean, that shouldn't be on the cover.
yeah,
And so, but yeah, no, I don't like that as much. But um, I think you're right. A little more explanation or a little preview of some of the parts would have been better. But
yeah,
again, I don't know how much did he cut out originally for the novel that he's put back in. I think it needed it. I
yeah,
enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was a very good book. It was beginning to end enjoyable. I know it took me forever to get it done, but I didn't ever dread, and I wasn't trying to skip ahead or anything. I was enjoying the story.
yeah,
I keep saying it, but he's a very good storyteller. So
yeah,
um,
yeah. I enjoyed it a lot. It's not funny, but I just happened to be looking on the Goodreads page for this book while I was reading it for something, and I actually saw a review from Jason Nickey
yeah, yeah, I saw.
from 2015, and I don't normally read reviews, but I just was curious because I know Jason, so I'm like, oh, what did he say? Um, and he had mentioned that the ending felt a little flat, and it it kind of did to me because
Yeah,
it was kind of like, this build up and then boom, he shuts his R off. Dunlap becomes a vegetable. And then they're just hanging out at Slaughter's house, and they're
well,
all like,
actually, they get basically adopted by the kid, and
yep,
they move to his property, and
yep,
so he becomes the father to the kid that lost basically didn't have a father, and he becomes the son of Slaughter in a way,
yep,
however you want to say that. And then they're taken care of. But then the female officer shows up and helps take care of them too, feeds them and stuff. So it becomes a family in a way.
yeah. It was she
Um,
was the secretary,
yeah.
or I hate to call her a secretary because that's not what she was, but she did the
She's like
radio.
the radio, yeah. She's
Yeah,
like
the older lady. So she kind of,
which makes you wonder, was she the love interest or was she another character? Because when he did the originally, they told him to get a love interest in there. So it makes you
yeah,
wonder what character, or if it's a totally new character. Because you know what would have made more sense? The love interest needed to be the medical examiner or the vet, and then they come together while they're trying to solve the puzzle of what's
solve the,
the
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So, but I'll
Hopefully
tell you
they had a
this,
name.
yeah, maybe that's why there is no name.
Yeah,
But um, I actually enjoyed it without the love interest. I enjoyed it as um, these individual flawed people coming
yeah,
together to try and overcome something that nobody understood.
yeah,
And and then again, I mean, part of the reason I think the ending falls short, or maybe it isn't as good as it was, is because the stupid mayor bumbling everything and getting it to the point where they're kind of trapped on the mountain fighting these creatures without a real game plan. And you
yeah,
could tell that Slaughter had thought it through and had an idea of how to overtake all these things and do it in a way that was humane and also wouldn't cost any lives on their end. Because at the end of the thing, they lost everybody but I think 10 people.
Yeah.
And I want to say they started off with at least 100.
Yeah. Yeah. It
So
was a huge number of people and they lost pretty much everybody.
at one point, though, they do say something about how the commune had 500 people. So if there was 500 people, they'd be vastly outnumbered. And somebody goes, you could say 200 and we'd be outnumbered. So I'm like, okay, so there's less than 200 of the townsfolk that have been riled up into this mob, which was funny too. They get a big mob going, get them out into the woods, and then it's nighttime. And they're like, well, we can't really do anything. So we're going to hunker down.
Yeah.
None of them want to be there at that point. So it's like, really, you got to take a step back when there's a big mob planning something, take a step back and think it through so you're not
Yep.
stuck out in the
Figure out
woods with a
what you're
bunch
gonna
of
do
murdering
next.
creatures.
And then
But
they're
yeah,
like, they find a helicopter and they're like, oh, we're gonna crash. And they kind of were like just okay with they're gonna fly up there in this helicopter, but they're not gonna be able to get back down because it was windy and there was no fuel.
right.
So it was, it was using all kinds of extra fuel to get up there. And it was the other cop, the one that was kind of like a bad seed, but he
Yeah,
ended up
Hamill,
turning
I think something
Hamill,
like
yeah.
that. But what was funny was is that of course he was in Vietnam and he tells him he flew helicopters. And then when he gets up in the air, he's like, I don't think you flew helicopters. But the guy by that point is already flying it. So
Yeah, they're already in the air, so what are you gonna do?
but he was also like the other pilot didn't want to fly them, the real pilot, because of the weight and the wind and all this stuff. He's like, we can't do it. So you could kind of get to tell that that guy was trying to make up for the previous earlier in the story he had gotten put in his place for being over eager and not
Yeah.
thinking things through. So, but it was a good callback. It was an interesting flow. Everything worked well. Um, but you could tell the editor's note, there's so many characters. You definitely there are a lot of people to keep up with, but I didn't think it was overwhelming at all.
No, not at all. And there were no dead spots. I wasn't like, oh, this chapter is just dragging on, you
Yeah,
know.
he did a really good job of pacing it because
Yeah.
it is a slower story
Yep.
because you need it to grow. You need the disbelief and the tension to grow to a point where it goes over the edge and then really gets us to the climax. He could have done a better job at the end, but I didn't even feel like it was that terrible of an ending. We've seen so many terrible
Oh
endings.
yeah, no, it definitely wasn't a terrible ending, but it was kind of just like, oh my gosh, it's good. And then oh,
Yeah,
it's over.
which you sometimes I appreciate because not every ending can be, we all won and we got $1 million and or
Yeah.
this guy wins the girl or we,
Yep.
however you want to do it. It's nice sometimes to see it just be what it would be.
Yeah.
The only thing that did stink about it was and maybe it's because it's realistic though. I mean, like they all basically lost their jobs. They're all just in retirement now and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they're all
but
like, how are they surviving? Because, we know Slaughter can't ride horses because he tried
yeah.
that and it didn't work out so well. And Dunlap's a vegetable, and
So you
the
have to think there
kid,
must have been some money in that property the kid inherits after the father dies.
yeah, yeah. No, I
But
think
yeah,
I think the ending bummed me out because, like I said, I was really rooting for Dunlop to get his
yeah,
shit together, and he just did not.
yeah. It was such a weird too because they even write it like see something snaps in his head and then that's it. He's just done. And then they
Yeah,
find him and he's just kneeling before the guy crucified and drooling on himself, and that's the end of that. So,
yeah. But
um,
definitely a good read, and I really suggest it. I recommend it. Um, I don't think I'd ever read it again, but I am really curious of reading the other version.
yeah, no, we if we come across the other version, we definitely should do a recap,
Yeah,
check it out. But I just remembered liking it. So I think in 15 years, you might be like, oh, I remember I liked this book. Maybe I'll read it again. Maybe that's how it sneaks back into your timeline. The thing with you though is you read so much stuff
yeah,
that I can't see how rereads ever slide in there. So,
yeah,
no. But yeah, no, I was excited to read it again. I don't feel like I was disappointed, even though it did take me a little bit longer than I thought it was going to. But um, It makes me want to go and read First Blood again.
Yeah, it's really making me want to read First Blood. That's on my radar. Um,
And so even though I know it's not traditional horror, we should do that, and then we could do the because the movie's different too, of course. So we could do
yeah,
that how they pair up. But in a way, he says he's in the introduction. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to tackle horror," but in a way, he's already done it in my head because when you read the first few books, the first book it could be survivalist horror, it could be you know government versus the individual, or because that's what it's about. It's he's come back from Vietnam and he goes to a town and they mistake him as a hippie or whatever, and they try and run him out, and then it all goes downhill from there. But in a way, it's a horrific
yeah,
thing that could have happened. And the next book is about a guy, if I remember correctly. It's been forever since I read it, but I'm pretty sure it's about a guy who's like a journalist who keeps doing like undercover work and stuff, and he writes these groundbreaking articles that expose things, and he exposes a right wing like nutso group that lives out in the middle of nowhere, and then they decide to take revenge and go after him and his family, and he has to go and disappear kind of thing. But that would be horrific too. So
yeah,
I could see how all of the stuff he's writing could be they're tinged with horror in my mind.
yep,
Now he'll say action thriller, things like that, because those are what sells or at least sold at that time. So, but yeah, no, I think he's a great, and he's got other horror things too. I think there's one called Seekers, and there's two or three other books he's done that are specifically considered horror novels. So he's one of those guys that I think can dip his toe in anything, and it comes out really well.
yeah, yeah, I agree. And now it's time for the Not Stephen King Book of the Week. And we have The Hungry Ghost by Delina Storm. Again, this is another book that I have no idea how I heard about it. It actually sat on my end table for literally 2 years before I picked it up and read it. I just read it last month or the month before. Um, the author is local in Massachusetts. The story takes place in Boston, so it's always fun to read a book that takes place locally because you recognize some of the landmarks
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. Basically, what it's about is there's two tracks here. Um, there's this ghost that's basically in this nowhere, and it's just hungry and it's voracious and it just wants to devour everything. Um, And then you have this woman who ends up getting in a car accident and goes into a coma, and her soul leaves her body, and the hungry ghost finds her body and takes over. Um, and the woman, her soul ends up going into a kitten. And then this hungry ghost wakes up, and um, of course, her family thinks it's her waking up from the coma, but they realize that she's different. Um, and there's just a lot of thing. She divorced her husband because he was an alcoholic, and she had a kind of fling happening with a former student of hers who happened to be a woman. Um, so you have a lot of players and a lot of things happening. So it's the would-be girlfriend and the ex-husband both trying to figure out why she's not acting right, and then the would-be girlfriend finds this kitten, um, and then realizes that it's actually the woman. So yeah, it's a really interesting story. It's you're kind of like it's one of those where you know what's happening, but the other characters don't, and you're like, no, don't go with her.
So yeah,
Something is
like
wrong.
watching a ghost story, but
Yeah,
I'm interested in the whole how does he figure out that the kitten's the lady? That to me would be a very interesting thing to read. So
yeah. There's like this guy owns this. It's called, I forget what it's called, but it's like used cat emporium, and it's basically this guy who just has this storefront, and he just takes in all these cats and adopts them out. Um, and she happens to walk by, goes in, and then just he plays with spiritualism and stuff. And um, so, yeah, it's a really, really cute story. I shouldn't say cute. It's disturbing, but it's a good story. it'll definitely keep you on your toes because you're wondering what the hell is going to happen and how is this all going to come together in the end.
Mhm.
Um, and how is it going to end? What's going to happen to the kitten? Is the soul going to go back into her body? What's going to go on? Um, and of course, I think what drew me to it, of course, is the cover because it's a
Yeah.
very, very good cover. So yeah, you definitely want to check this out if you like a ghost story, and if you like kittens. So
Yeah, it sounds
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. Stop that. So yeah, check out The Hungry Ghost by Delina Storm. I really enjoyed it, and I think you would too. And that's our episode for today. We're getting ready for Texas AuthorCon and Book Festival, so we've been doing a lot of interviews. But yeah, we'll get back on our regular schedule soon enough.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Take it easy.